to talk about how you got started in the business, maybe, and then we'll take that journey.
Yeah, it was, I guess, it was unexpected. Probably like a lot of people. Feel silly sitting down. I didn't start, I didn't think I was going to be a comedian when I was like, a lot of people this way, they when they're 13, like, oh, I want to do a stand-up comedy. But I was an artist. I was like a visual artist. I was always a bit of a weird kid, and I was always looking for outlets outside of the normal kind of school, the straight and narrow kind of path. So I hung around in the art room, and I kind of kept to myself, and I did visual art all through high school. We didn't have much of a performing arts program in my high school. And then I did the senior show, and I was, I kind of got some laughs. Cool. This was a senior year of high school. It was my first time I really was up there on the stage and getting people to laugh at me and things like that. And then some of the teachers afterward, they're like, this could be something you could do. And it kind of made me think, wow, it opened the idea, the possibility. So then I went to Emerson College. There was a lot of comedians there. Guys like Eddie Brill. Do you guys know Eddie? Because he was the one who...
Perfect.
Eddie Brill, and a lot of comics went there. It was kind of a comedy school that had a number of improv groups. I auditioned and I got into one of the groups there, and I started doing improv, doing some of the same stuff you guys are doing right here, just doing games in front of the audiences, doing anything we could to get laughs. We didn't even know, back then we didn't have a lot of, the improv scene wasn't as big, so we weren't able to kind of follow all the rules of improv. We just kind of got up there and winged it, and we were just having a good time and getting laughs. And people were doing stand-up at college there. So there were some people like David Cross was at school there, and a guy named Anthony Clark, and they were doing stand-up in college, and then they were going out at night and doing spots in the clubs in Boston. And I thought, like, wow, this is really, it was the first time I thought, maybe this is something you could do. It always seemed impossible to me, because I would see stand-up comedians on TV, and I think, well, just the path to get there must be so crazy. It was out of my worldview, But watching these other guys doing it, I thought, well, maybe I'll give it a try. So one day I got up, and I remember the first bit. I remember the first bit I was doing improv. They did a thing that was called Slow Motion Moments of Everyday Life. It was a game we did, and somebody yelled out sport. It was slow motion moments of everyday life, but it was non-sports. An everyday activity. So they went to the audience and said, "Could we have an activity, please?" And somebody said ironing, and then another person he was the play-by-play announcer, and he was like, "And here we are with the Olympics, and here is Tom Shillue, he's going to be ironing." And I remember running out, and people were laughing. I was like, I got my shirt off, and I started like ironing, and I was like warming up to do the ironing, and I started ironing. I don't know what happened in the bit, but then he went, "Now let's look at that in super slow motion." I was like, and then the announcer said something like, "Oh, it looks like he looks like he's burned himself." We would kind of play off each other, and then I burned myself. And I got big laughs with that. And I thought that could be my first bit. So I started doing stand-up, and so hard to stand up the first time. You have to, you don't know what and it was so good to have a physical bit to do that. So I got up, and I forget what my setup was, but it ended up morphing into this bit where I get up, and I still do it to this day. I go around, I open for Jim Gaffigan. Do you guys know Jim Gaffigan? Yeah. Hot Pockets. Yeah. This guy is big. He makes tons of money, plays these big theaters, and I open for him. So it's great to have this big audience. And I still use that bit. I open the show. It's a good way to get people to focus, because everyone's there to see Jim Gaffigan. So, ladies and gentlemen, Jim Gaffigan, yeah! To open the show, we have another guy, Tom Shillue, and then I walk out. Oh, great. And so I open this, I come out, I grab my phone out. Oh yeah, I'm getting older. I feel like I'm getting older. I was actually watching golf on TV this weekend. That's pretty bad, isn't it? Golf is boring enough to play, and everyone watch it on TV. But then to make it extra boring, they actually show slow motion replays. What can you learn by watching a guy putt in slow motion? It's like this. Let's slow that down. I see what you're doing there. Then I go into the second bit. I say, my favorite sport to watch on TV is basketball. And when I like basketball, great. Do what I do. When you're watching the basketball game, and they have one of those slow motion replays, don't look at the players. Look in the background, because there's always some coach back there in a suit and tie who doesn't realize he's on the air. You watch him, he's like, he's like, you always open with that slow motion thing. I say, it's a great way to get the audience's focus. But it all goes back to that first time I did stand-up. I was just looking for something to get a laugh. And it was one little thing that came out of that improv game. It was that iron, burning the iron, and it got a big laugh from the crowd. And I thought, okay, that's a skill I can do. I can do slow motion, so I'm going to use that, like play my strength. So to this day, when I did my half-hour special for Comedy Central, opened up with that slow motion thing. And that's something still people remember, you know. And it's funny, because I don't even have a lot of respect for that bit, because it's one of those early bits. I think, oh, that's kid stuff. That's what I did when I first started. But it's one of the bits people remember. Sometimes people come up and they say, oh, I love that slow motion bit you did. So, you know, it's good to kind of hold on to those things. But that's what kind of gave me the springboard, made things seem possible. Then I moved to New York. I kind of came and just started running around, just playing gigs. I met Jim Gaffey, and he and I started together, and we went around to the clubs. And back in those days, the possibilities were a lot more narrow. You had to find a comedy club and get on stage somehow. Try to convince somebody to give you a Tuesday night at midnight or 1 in the morning. And then you could eventually maybe work your way up if you had some friends, if comics recommended you or things like that. You could go on the weekends, do your Friday and Saturday night spots. Then you start to get paid. Then you want the audition spots for the TV shows, and then you get on TV, and then you get your credits, and then you can really start to build a reputation. Now it's such a better time. I wish I was starting. I wish I was your guys' age, because you can do YouTube. You can find an audience by yourself. There's people I know, they're getting fans. They have thousands of fans on Twitter. They just tweet jokes every day. People don't even know who they are. They put their picture on the internet, they tweet jokes, and they're comedians, but they have fans. They have an audience of 5,000 every day because they're tweeting. I wish I had that when I was starting, because I was like struggling to get up in front of 30 people at a time. Now you have this big audience. I know people who, I don't know if anyone knows Derek Comedy. Donald Glover from Community. He was in a group called Derek Comedy. I used to hang out at their shows in Queens. They did the Creek in Long Island City. He and 2 other guys from NYU started this comedy group, Derek. They would just do comedy videos. You've probably seen some of them online. If you don't, look up Donald and look up Derek Comedy, D-E-R-R-I-C-K. They started doing videos and putting them on YouTube. 800,000 hits, 1 million hits. They became this huge comedy sensation. They'd never played a club before. They'd never been on stage. They were just making funny videos. Then they had fans from YouTube, and they said, hey, come to see our show at the Creek in Long Island City. They did the show in Long Island City. All their fans came. The place is sold out. Meanwhile, I've been in the business for 15 years. I've been on TV, whatever. Now I'm begging Donald Glover, this student, for spots. I'm like, Donald, let me open for you, because he went out and he found his own audience. So it's such a better time now. There's so many different ways to get into comedy. I feel like I'm like a bit of a motivational speaker now with you guys, but it's like it's such a great time for all the performing arts, because you can make your own audience. You don't need people telling you you're good. You put your own thing on. You find out what makes you laugh. You put it online, and you'll find an audience. So that's my little story.
I share a similar, because I know people like Dimitri Martin and a lot of guys, the downtown underground comedy scene, the non-mainstream scene, and all of a sudden they're taking over the industry in many sectors. You don't have to be a big success to everybody now. There are networks that have a few 100,000 people and they're running on a TV network. You don't have to have 5, 10, 15 million people watching on a TV show.
Yeah.
So there's targeted marketing, and that's exactly very huge in this business.
Dimitri couldn't get on at the clubs.
Right.
Back when I was starting to have some success, Dimitri was doing these one-liner jokes. I don't know if you know Dimitri Martin, but he's got a kind of a very intellectual, I don't know what you would call it, it's very...
Well, to me, it's almost more like a downtown theater sensibility to comedy.
But it's very
avant-garde, right.
It's avant-garde, but it's essentially jokes. He thinks of a funny line. He was doing Twitter before Twitter existed. He always had one-liner, kind of jokes. And he's a great guy to find online and see what he's doing. But he couldn't get on at the clubs because he would stand on stage and he would kind of talk like this, and he had like the long hair, and he was quiet, and he would just say his jokes, And if you liked him, you liked him. If you didn't, you didn't. He was just, I'm just going to do my thing. And the clubs were like, we've seen it before, we've seen that kind of dry thing.
Right.
Who was the guy?
Stephen Wright.
Stephen Wright, Mitch Hedberg had been doing one-liner, so they always used to reference other more famous people and say, oh, you're too much like Stephen Wright, or you're too much like this guy. Well, Dimitri went off on his own. He found his own audience. Now the clubs are thanking him, but he's like, I don't play clubs anymore. Now I have huge fans. I play theaters. So he, again, has the audience come to him. And he was a guy who couldn't get on anywhere. Gaffigan was another guy, and he couldn't get on anywhere until it was almost like he did his Comedy Central special, And people loved it so much, they were like, oh, this guy, they didn't understand, because in New York, they didn't think he was so great. Out in the Midwest, they loved it. You know, they're lining up to see him, so.
I thought New York is a very different market than anywhere else in the country. You know, it's very, and even LA is very different, but the New York comics, a lot of comics do well in New York, don't do well in New York. They don't do well, the New York club comics.
Yeah.
It's an edgier, maybe even more so Jersey. But you know, and not that there's exceptions to every rule, but a lot of the ones that work here, and then vice versa. The folks that are making millions on the road or really good money on the road come to New York and just don't do the clubs as well. Like a very different market.
Yeah. It's all essentially, it's whatever you find funny. Whatever you find makes you giggle. Everyone's got their thing that they do. And you look at the people out there who are Zach Galifianakis. He's weird. Zach Galifianakis is a weird guy. He was weird at the beginning, and he's weird when he's famous. And he used to sit around with his beard, and he would make us laugh. And we're like, this guy's never gonna make a dime in this business. He's the funniest guy we know, but he's too weird. Yeah. He's too weird. But of course, he found his audience, and now he's like a big, you know, he's a movie star and everything like that. But he always did what he thought was funny, not what anybody else did. And this is the path. David Cross, the same thing. He was in New York. I don't know if you knew David Cross. Now he's like a millionaire from doing. He does anime. It's oddly, you know, he's got. Yeah, and he does, you know, he does a lot of animation voices and things like that. But he always did stuff that he thought was funny, but it was just too edgy and weird and dirty and irreverent for the industry, you know. And you know, he's like the opposite of Gaffigan. Gaffigan was always very clean, and he was always very kind of family friendly. And in New York, they were kind of like, we don't get him, you know, he's not edgy, he's not like, you know. And he found his audience. So everyone kind of finds their own thing, but it's like, it's important not to do an imitation of what you think is funny of somebody else, or, you know, try to model yourself off of what you think comedy is, or what you think is going to get a TV show, or whatever. Because if you really look at the people who kind of break through and have a career, it's just people who are doing what they think is funny and what makes them laugh. Yeah.
If you guys don't know who David Cross is, you should check out, because it's good for these guys. Mr. Show with Bob and David.
Crazy.
I actually have the DVDs, but
Mr. Show is the
Arrested Development. He was on
that for the movie.
But Mr. Show was great sketch comedy stuff. Those of us that are writing our sketches. And the great thing about Mr. Show from an artistic standpoint is that they were able to transition every little bit. It's almost like having out, but every bit transitioned into each other.
Yeah.
And there was like a weird thing that showed up throughout the entire thing. Just like in improv, when we do callbacks, they would call back. They'd find their way all the way back to the beginning of the show at the end of the 1 hour show. And everything led into itself. A really good show for you guys to watch.
And again, just a way to make them laugh. Those writers, when you talk to those guys, they say, we were just trying to make it not boring to write the show, because it was a bunch of different sketches and everyone was doing their own thing. And they said, how can we connect these to make this just interesting for us? Almost like in a way, like a, you know, like make it like a puzzle for them.
Yeah.
And give them something to do other than just, you know, try to write comedy sketches, which they had done, they'd been doing for years. So it was almost like an inside joke, but then it turned into something that the fans went crazy for. As usual, it's the things it's the unexpected things that make people laugh themselves, and you don't think it's going to make other people laugh. My first Comedy Central, I did a thing called I'm an Artist. It was a character, and I tell you, this is a weird thing, it came out of a little bit of bitterness. I was angry that I wanted to get a half-hour special, because I was out working the club. I had an hour of material I thought was really good, and I was like, Comedy Central's going to give me a half-hour special. They didn't. Some of my friends, Jim Gaffigan was getting one, Dimitri had done his half-hour, and so, you know, you think it's your shot. I didn't get my half-hour special. They said, oh, you can do Premium Blend, which was a show which people are after that. They want to get on these shows. It was like a show like Live at Gotham, or, you know, where they show, each one does about 5 minutes. And I thought I was one of those comics who deserved his own half hour, but they gave me the 5 minutes. So I was kind of like, I don't want to burn my material on the show. So I had this character that was funny, and I had only done it one time. I had done it at a little club downtown called Luna Lounge. And it was this character who came out, he thought he was cool with everybody, you know, and he's like, and he sang a song, I'm an artist, I know more than you, and it was just weird, okay? It's online, you can find it. If you look at my name and write, I'm an artist. And I did it on the show, almost like, you know, I'm not gonna give Comedy Central 5 to 10 minutes of my material, when I'm gonna use that for my half hours, but I didn't want to blow my material on this show. So I did this thing, almost like just to get them back. I did it, it got huge laughs. And comedians were writing me, you know, from Toronto and LA. I saw that bit you did, it was great, because it was different, it was weird, and it was out of the box. And it got people's attention, you know. So again, to this day, people talk to, you did that, I'm an artist? I was a little kid when that came out. I'm like, oh great, I'm old. But then a couple of years, and that did well on the show, and it did well, and it kind of set me apart. Again, a couple of years later, I did get the half-hour special. So things always come along. Now I'm trying to get an hour special, or another half hour. I got a Letterman audition coming up in a couple of weeks. That'll be good. I've never done Letterman. I've done Conan, but I haven't done Letterman. And so that's what I'm shooting for. So it's like, you see old guys like me, you're like, oh, this guy's out there, he's just kind of coasting, but we're always hungry. Like, I'm as hungry as the young guys just getting into it, because I want that Letterman spot. I want that Letterman spot just the way that, like, you know, one of you guys might want to, you know, get a spot on this show, or maybe do a thing at UCB or one of these theaters or something like that. So you're always hungry, and if you're not always hungry and enjoying the business and the climb and trying to claw your way into the business and get in front of people and all that stuff, then things get dark. People get, you know, it becomes all about your career and ambition and things like that, and you got to make it a game. It's like, it is a game. It's like these improv games, that's your whole life. You make your whole career a game. How do I get people's attention? How do I get people to look at my tweets? Yesterday I was writing a tweet, how can I make this tweet funnier, you know? And then I tweeted it, and then it gets retweeted by some, Andy Kindler retweeted me, you know, you get excited when your peers think you're funny, you know? So it's still a game to me the way it was when I started, and I feel like that's the way you have to deal with it, you know?
One question before I open up the Q&A, I'd love to ask, because a lot of our guys are doing sketch and stand-up comedy writing now in their fourth semester. What is your process? I know every comic has their own little process, from percentage of improv, percentage of sit-down writing. What is your process from day one to the bit?
Well, I try things out now. I do, like you were talking, I do storytelling. So sometimes I just get up and I talk about my dad. I got on stage the other night and I was like, you know, I don't know what I'm going to say, but I know my dad called me, so I get up and I just talk to people. And I do it on the weeknights. I go out on, you know, when there's not as much pressure. People haven't paid $20 to see, so I go out to these clubs where it's either free or $5 cover, and I start working on material that way. You know, it's not too self-indulgent. I'm there. I'm gonna get laughs, but I'm not really sure where I'm gonna go. So I get up and say, oh, I was talking to my dad the other day, and I said, Dad, you should get Skype. You should download Skype. And he was like, nah, I'm not downloading anything. I don't want them looking at me. And he said that, and then when I said his line, it got a laugh. And I was like, okay, that's it. So I don't know where that bit is going to go, but it really happened with my dad. It was something that happened, and it made me laugh that my dad said, I don't want them looking at me. Who's them? And that's what I said to the audience, who's them? Who's he talking about? Who's these people he thinks are going to be looking at him online? So there's something funny about my dad, that he's this kind of old curmudgeon guy, and he thinks people are going to be looking at him through his computer. So maybe that's the start of the story. See, that's another laugh. So whenever I get a laugh from people, I kind of file it. I put it in the old Rolodex, and I take my sets wherever I go. I always have my phone with me, and I tape it. And then on the way home, I'll say, you know, that got a laugh when my dad said, I don't want them looking at me. Now that's a laugh, and then as a comic, you hold on to that. You know, that's your bread and butter, laughs. And then it's a matter of stringing your laughs along. I start telling the story about my dad, and maybe they don't like part two, so I throw that away and then I try something else. Maybe I have to just do that little anecdote about my dad, and there's nothing more to that joke. Maybe that's all there is. And then I say, you know, my dad, when I was a kid, I used to be tied to a tree. He tied me to a tree, and it was a good solution, you know. He didn't have to watch me, make sure I didn't go in the street. No, that really happened. I was tied to a tree. As a kid, I had a little harness, and I was tied to a tree. I used to run around the street like this. Now, see, that gets a laugh, right? So maybe it's a physical bit. So maybe next time I go up on stage, I'll say, oh, you know, I'll tell that story about my dad, and then I'll say, I don't want them looking at me. And that gets a laugh. I say, and my dad was always kind of a weird guy. He used to tie me to a tree as a kid. So I'm building a story now, you know. It's like the tied to a tree thing. I know this got a laugh, you know. And then I know that, you know, I don't want them looking at me. I know that got a laugh. So it's building blocks. It's like clay. And it slowly forms. And the way you do it when you start, because I know you guys are saying like, yeah, but I don't have clubs that are inviting me out every night to try stuff out. They're not like, hey, you're a professional comedian, come do 10 minutes and just wing, you know. So how do you do it? Well, this is a method I started, and I teach classes through the pit. I teach stand-up classes. And this is something I did when I started out, and I've used it my whole life. I don't actually do the pen and paper stuff anymore. It's all it's all kind of in my memory, right? And on the device. But I recommend this to everybody. This is just kind of a stand-up technique that's great to use. You go out, you try your stand-up. Say you have like 5 minutes of material you want to try. You go out, you try it, you take the set, okay? In the course of the 5 minutes, say you get 3 good laughs, and then maybe there's some titters and laughs here and there throughout the set, okay? So you go home, you take that recording, and you don't just listen to it, you write it down. You play it, and you transcribe it. Every word you said on there, you write it down. Whether you wrote it down originally or not, maybe you had stand-up notes that you wrote, maybe you had bullet points, but this is a fresh, clean piece of new paper, and you transcribe what you heard on that tape. All your ums and ahs, your, how you doing tonight? It's like, hey buddy, nice sneakers. Even if you improvise with the audience, you write all that down, okay? Then you go back on the tape, you play it again after it's all transcribed, and everywhere there's a laugh, you underline in red where people laugh. And then you look at the page. And if there's red here, say there's 3 reds right here, that's a good little section right there. You get 3 laughs in it. Maybe there's a whole section of white. Just take it out. It's that simple. It's like geometry. Like take that block and just take it out. Or if it's very necessary information, like maybe it's maybe you bring up your dad in that section. You were talking about your dad. It didn't get a laugh. Somehow crush that down to 1 line or something. Reduce that white section, and then you have some more red right here. It's like it takes away you're just looking for red at this point. It's like, a 5-year-old could do it. You just want a lot of red on that page. So that technique is so simple, and it's so effective. Because I used to take my sets, I'd write them out, and I was like, wow, I didn't realize there was all that white there. And you look at that white, and you're like, how can I reduce that? And you look at that whole paragraph, and you say, well, I could say that in 1 sentence. Instead of saying, I was watching TV the other night, and then I put on a pot of water and made a cup of tea, and then I realized I was getting older, and then I blah, 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 and then I do that. And you know this whole thing, and you say, maybe I could just reduce it to, geez, I feel like I'm getting older. I was actually watching golf on TV the other day. Golf is pretty boring to play. I want to watch it on TV. What do you learn by watching a guy putt in slow motion? And then I start the bit. So I've reduced that setup, what we call like setups and punchlines. I'm setting up that laugh in as little space as possible. Maybe I don't even need all that. It's just I'm kind of used to saying it that way. But that's basically like 3 little sentences, and it's about how long? 8 seconds before I get into the bit. And so that's the kind of muscle you want to work when you're doing stand-up. You do it, write it down, and analyze it. And instead of thinking it out and like, oh, does this work or is that funny, whatever. Really, just a nice, easy way. Underline those laughs in red and reduce where there's no red. Just take it out, and then eventually you got a whole page of red. That means you got a nice stand-up set, and you got a good 5 minutes. It's great.
Very cool.